My name is Helen, but people call me Nell, and I'm 60 years old. Not long ago, my son stood in the living room where he'd once played with toy cars and told me words that cut deeper than anything I've ever known. He said, "Either you live here on Charlotte's terms or you leave quietly." Charlotte's terms weren't about respect or harmony. They meant pouring her tea, tidying their laundry, and staying silent in my own home as if I were nothing more than a servant. The sting wasn't Charlotte's arrogance. I'd seen her sneer often enough, but the way my son nodded beside her, as though betraying me was natural. I didn't break. I didn't beg, I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I knew something they didn't. My hand brushed the house keys in my pocket, a quiet reminder of where true ownership lay. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If stories like this one resonate with you, hit subscribe. Before everything soured, my days were simple and steady. I would wake early, before the street stirred, and put the kettle on. The smell of strong tea filled the kitchen, while the radio mumbled the morning headlines. Some mornings I'd walk down to the corner shop for milk and bread, exchanging a laugh with the cashier who'd known me for years. Other days, I tended to my roses, pruning carefully while nodding hello to Jean, my neighbor across the hedge. Those small rituals kept me grounded, especially after years of carrying the weight alone. I lost my husband when I was 43. One moment we were planning our retirement. The next, I was standing at his graveside clutching a folded order of service. From then on, it was just me and David. I worked nights at the local care home, scrubbing floors, helping patients to bed, sometimes staying on for double shifts when someone called in sick. I missed school concerts, Christmas dinners, and even one of David's birthdays, but every missed moment was for a reason, keeping the mortgage payments steady, making sure he never felt the chill of insecurity. We lived modestly. David wore secondhand jumpers, and I often patched my own coat rather than buy a new one. Yet when he wanted football boots or a calculator for school, I found a way. I thought those choices showed him love, even if they went unnoticed at the time. There are objects in this house that carry my story. The house deed, tucked in the bottom drawer of the cabinet, bears only my name. My husband wanted me protected no matter what came after. The wedding ring I still wear has thinned over the years, the gold worn smooth from endless scrubbing and polishing. The family photo album sits on the coffee table, its pages worn from years of turning. Taped corners hold snapshots of birthdays and first days of school, each one a piece of the life we built together. And in my coat pocket, I always keep the spare house keys, jangling softly whenever I walk. They remind me that, no matter what happens, this home has always been my anchor. Charlotte entered our lives with bright smiles, but behind them I noticed shadows. She often dismissed my Sunday roasts as too heavy or sighed when I put out my old china. Once, she ran her hand along the banister and said, "This place has so much potential. Imagine what could be done with it." She called my curtains dated and my garden old-fashioned. They sounded like passing remarks, but I felt the edge in them, sharp as a knife. Still, I told myself love would smooth the corners. I wanted to believe she and David would build their life with kindness. I never guessed how quickly those casual comments would turn into something far more sinister. The first crack came on an ordinary afternoon. I was in the hallway, folding laundry, when I heard Charlotte's voice carry from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking low but firm. "Once the house is sorted, we'll be comfortable. She won't stand in the way." The words froze me mid-step. At first, I told myself I'd misheard. Maybe she was talking about something else, a bill or some arrangement. But her tone lingered in my ears, sharp, certain, as though I was nothing more than a piece of furniture blocking her plans. I wanted to dismiss it, but the unease settled deep in my chest. A few days later, the unease became reality. David called me into the living room. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Charlotte sat on the arm of his chair, her smile thin, almost smug. Then he said it. "Mum, either you live here on Charlotte's terms or you leave quietly." Charlotte's terms. Words that sounded more like orders than compromises. I was expected to pour tea when asked, wash their clothes, keep silent if I had an opinion, in my own home. The sting wasn't just Charlotte's arrogance. I'd seen enough of her sharp edges to expect as much. It was my son, my boy, who once held my hand crossing the road, standing beside her as though this was fair. His head was bowed slightly, eyes darting to the floor, but his silence was louder than any shout. Charlotte leaned back, lips curled in something close to victory. The room felt colder than I'd ever known it, as though the warmth of years of Sunday dinners, birthday cakes, and laughter had been stripped away in an instant. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, but inside, disbelief roared. How had the son I sacrificed so much for become the man who asked me to choose between servitude and exile? After that ultimatum, the house I'd once considered my sanctuary began to feel like a stranger's place. At first, it was small things. A letter from the bank I'd been expecting never arrived. I thought maybe I had misplaced it, but then another statement went missing. I've always kept the post neatly stacked on the hall table, but the pile looked thinner whenever Charlotte passed through first. Then I noticed the phone. David would be in the shower or out in the garden, and Charlotte would snatch his mobile the moment it buzzed. She'd lower her voice, whispering quickly before slipping it back as if nothing had happened. When I entered the room, she'd smile too brightly and change the subject. Even the keys unnerved me. I've always placed them in a small dish near the door. One evening, I reached for them and found the dish empty. My stomach dropped. After searching, I found them later tucked into the wrong drawer. No one admitted moving them. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was tired, imagining shadows, yet the unease kept pressing. One afternoon, while tidying the sitting room, I opened a drawer and found an estate agent's business card slipped between magazines. My heart thudded. Why would Charlotte or David have that? The whispers confirmed it. I woke late one night to muffled voices seeping through the walls. Charlotte's tone was sharp. Her name is still on it. We can't do anything until that changes. David mumbled something I couldn't catch, but it was enough. They were talking about the house. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, doubt gnawing at me. Was I losing my grip? Was grief or age twisting my mind, making me paranoid? I wanted to believe that. It would have been easier to think the problem was me, but every day the dread grew heavier. Charlotte's words grew bolder, her sighs louder, her disdain sharper. She corrected me at dinner, rearranged my cupboards as if testing how far she could push me. David drifted further away, avoiding my eyes, answering in short phrases. The boy I'd once known seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Through it all, I clung to what I could trust. My wedding ring, worn smooth but steady, reminded me of the love that built this home. The deed, safely tucked away, whispered security, though I hadn't shown it in years. The keys in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a small weight grounding me. I held on to those symbols because they reminded me I wasn't powerless. Yet the silence in my own house pressed against me, warning me that something bigger was coming, something I could no longer ignore. One evening, when the house was finally quiet, I did something I never thought I'd do. I crept into David's study. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I needed answers. The desk lamp cast a dim glow, highlighting a stack of papers. I opened the drawer carefully, afraid of making the slightest sound. That's when I saw them. Printouts of draft emails, half-written messages to a solicitor. My eyes scanned the words, each line heavier than the last. They were about the house. About my house. Charlotte's name was written where owner should have been. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters, disbelief washing over me. It wasn't speculation anymore. They weren't just talking about renovations or future plans. They were preparing to transfer the house into their names, as if I were already gone. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. My son, my own flesh and blood, was part of this, yet something about the notes felt hesitant. The drafts weren't finished. David's handwriting was uneven, almost uncertain. It looked more like a man being pushed than one leading the charge. That detail struck me like a second blow. The betrayal was real, but I could see Charlotte's fingerprints all over it. She was the driving force. Her ambition, her entitlement, her hunger for control, those were the engines. David seemed swept along, weak but complicit. I wanted to march upstairs, confront them both, demand an explanation. But instinct held me back. This wasn't the full story yet. If I exploded now, They'd cover their tracks, twist their words, maybe even succeed in making me doubt myself. So I slid the papers back exactly as I'd found them, switched off the lamp, and walked quietly to my room. My heart was broken, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I knew I had to wait. The truth was only beginning to show itself. It started with little barbs at the dinner table, sharp enough to sting but disguised as jokes. Charlotte would wrinkle her nose at the gravy and say, "Oh, Helen, you really are old-fashioned. No one cooks like this anymore." She'd laugh, clinking her glass against David's as if I were a relic on display. At first, David stayed silent. Then, slowly, he began repeating her words, almost word for word. "Maybe Mom should think about downsizing," he muttered one evening, not meeting my eyes. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Downsizing? This house had been my life's anchor. One night, I gathered my courage and asked softly, "David, why is Charlotte so interested in the house?" His face flushed. He stammered, "It's nothing, Mom. Just future planning. Everyone has to think ahead." His denial was clumsy, but what hurt more was the way he refused to look at me. My son, once the boy who used to run into my arms after school, now stood beside Charlotte, not me. The walls of my own kitchen felt like they were closing in. Every time I set the table or brewed tea, Charlotte's presence pressed harder, smothering me. I could feel my dignity crumbling like dust between my fingers. Then came the shift. Charlotte stopped pretending. She started rearranging furniture, moving my photographs into drawers, replacing them with her own decorations. She spoke with authority, issuing little commands. "This couch works better by the window." The kitchen could really use brighter colors. I came downstairs one Saturday to find her hosting two of her friends, showing them around as if giving a tour of a house she already owned. My photographs were gone from the mantel, replaced by vases I'd never seen. My chest tightened. "Isn't it lovely?" Charlotte said, sweeping her arm across the room. "So much potential, once it's properly updated." The women nodded, murmuring approval, barely acknowledging me when I entered. I felt like a ghost in my own living room. Invisible, erased. David stood by, awkward but silent. Not once did he defend me, not once did he remind Charlotte, or himself, that this was my home. His silence was the deepest cut. Every evening, the air grew thicker with unspoken words. Charlotte grew bolder, and I grew smaller. I kept my head high, but inside I was breaking. This house was supposed to be the monument of my sacrifices, the proof of years I spent working nights, raising David alone. Now, it felt like I was watching someone steal, not just the bricks and mortar, but the very life I had built inside them. I wasn't just losing a house, I was losing myself. The evening of the dinner was my breaking point. Charlotte had invited her friends again, women in bright dresses and louder laughs, filling the dining room with talk of renovations, furniture, and holidays I'd never been a part of. I served the roast quietly, my movements deliberate, while they chatted over me as though I were staff. Then I heard her. Clear as glass. Charlotte raised her glass and announced, "Well, soon this will all be ours. The deed will be in our name, and then we can finally make this place what it should be." Something inside me stilled, not broke, no, it hardened. I placed the carving knife gently on the table and excused myself, calm as ever. My feet carried me upstairs to the locked cabinet in my bedroom. My hands didn't tremble as I turned the key and pulled out the folder I'd guarded for decades. When I returned, the table had grown louder with laughter. No one noticed me at first as I slid the folder onto the center of the table and unfolded the papers. "Perhaps," I said softly, "we should all see who this house belongs to." The room fell silent. Charlotte's eyes flicked to the documents, her smile faltering. David shifted in his chair, his face paling. I tapped the deed with my finger. "Read it." "Every line. This house is in my name. Solely mine. It always has been." Charlotte's cheeks flushed. "That doesn't mean—" But I cut across her. My voice was steady, years of sacrifice lacing every word. "I bought this roof over our heads with my life. I worked nights at the care home when my bones ached. I wore the same coat for 7 winters so David could have football boots. I ate stale bread so there would be fresh milk in his cereal. Every bill, every payment, I carried it. David swallowed, his eyes finally meeting mine. Mom, Charlotte snapped, her voice sharp. This is manipulation, David. She's trying to guilt you. No. My hand closed over my wedding ring, turning it slowly. This isn't guilt. This is truth. This home is mine, not yours to take. Not hers to demand. The silence pressed heavy. I pulled my keys from my pocket, the familiar weight glinting under the light. I laid them gently on the deed. If you want me gone, I'll go. With my keys, my deed, and my dignity. But I will not be erased. My gaze drifted to the mantel, where my family photographs had been hidden away in drawers. And I will not let my memories, our memories, be written out of this house. For a moment, no one moved. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came. The friends glanced awkwardly at one another, clearly realizing they had walked into something far darker than an ordinary dinner. David lowered his head, shame coloring his cheeks. He looked like a boy again, caught doing something he knew was wrong. I straightened, gathering the papers back into their folder. The truth is simple, I said, my voice calm, final. This house has my name. And my name is not yours to rewrite. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. Charlotte's scheme lay exposed, her ambition crumbling in the face of fact. And for the first time in months, I felt taller, steadier. I was not invisible. I was home. That night, after the guests had gone and the house was shrouded in a thick, uneasy silence, I packed my suitcase. Not in defeat, but in choice. My hands moved steadily, folding clothes, tucking away my photo album, slipping the deed back into its folder. The wedding ring stayed on my finger. The keys remained in my pocket. Charlotte stormed about downstairs, her voice shrill, insisting, David, do something. But David sat in the kitchen, silent, staring at the empty table where the truth had been laid bare. When I descended the stairs, suitcase in hand, David rose quickly. Mom, please don't go like this. His face was pale, almost boyish in its regret. But regret comes late when trust has already been broken. Charlotte glared at me, red with fury. This is your fault. You've ruined everything. I didn't argue. I simply lifted the handle of my suitcase and said, quietly but firmly, you gave me two choices. I chose my own. And then I walked out. Jean, my dear neighbor, opened her door without hesitation. She pulled me inside with a hug, made me tea, and told me I wasn't alone. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, safe in the warmth of friendship. Word spread quickly in our small community. People noticed Charlotte's smug talk had gone silent. Her reputation, once polished, began to crumble. Whispers followed her at the shops, at church. She had tried to seize what wasn't hers, and everyone knew it now. David came by once, standing awkwardly on Jean's doorstep, asking if we could talk. I listened, but I didn't soften. Love remains, but trust takes years to build and a moment to shatter. He saw in my eyes what he had lost, and it broke him more than any words I could have spoken. The house remains mine. Legally, entirely, undeniably mine. Charlotte lost her power, her plan in tatters. David is left facing not just the consequences of betrayal, but the silence of his own conscience. And me? I regained what mattered most, my dignity. My voice. My choice. When I look back now, I see clearly. A house is just bricks and mortar, but dignity. That is something no one can take unless you hand it over. I spent decades building a life, not just paying bills, but giving love, giving time, giving everything I had for my son. And in return, I was asked to shrink myself, to serve quietly in my own home. I learned that loyalty cannot be bought with comfort, nor should a child's future be paved with a mother's sacrifice stripped of respect. I still love my son, but I love myself enough not to let greed define the end of my story. If you're listening to me now, hold on to this. You are allowed to choose your dignity over anyone's demands. Tell me, what would you have done in my place?